On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we speak with the Broadband Forum on how it expects its recently introduced focus on NFV, SDN, and cloud platforms to benefit broadband providers. Joining us for this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News. And this week we are joined by Robin Mersh, who's the CEO of the Broadband Forum. We'll talk a bit about the Broadband Forum itself, but also some of its work recently in moving towards the virtualization space. So, hey, Robin, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Hi, Dan.
Very good. Let me start off with a little, if you want to give a little background maybe on Broadband Forum, for those who don't know much about you guys, maybe a little background on the founding of the organization, maybe current operations, kind of how you interact with the mobile telecom space as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm sure a lot of your viewers probably aren't so aware because we have been in the sort of fixed space, for obviously a whole of our existence. But let me give you a bit of sort of context because I think there are some definite touch points and it's been increasing over the last few years. So we've been actually around for 25th anniversary actually this year.
Wow. Okay.
Now, on the one hand, you could sort of say that that's kind of, well, that's a bad thing. It's like, that sounds like legacy. That's kind of, your ancient kind of thing. But our experience is very wide and deep. We started off, actually, originally we were in the ATM space. So that's kind of how far back it goes. When ATM was new. Of course, the interesting thing is that there's still a ton of ATM around.
True, yeah.
Not a lot of people realize.
You can't kill that stuff.
Right. I mean, so that's where we sort of started. But then, it was through various kind of mergers, we ended up as the Broadband Forum. But we were always in the business of bringing in sort of new technologies, as they were, like ATM, like ADSL when it still started, and VDSL2. The real purpose was maybe to begin with a little bit more evangelism. It was really kind of marketing the technologies and just sort of showing people what they were capable of doing. And it's not unusual, is it? There's a lot of those kind of organizations sort of start off, and still a lot are around like that. But we kind of morphed into something a lot different to that. So starting off maybe having evangelism in our minds, but it very soon sort of became about reducing barriers to market. So the barriers in the market it wasn't that people didn't know what they were and what they were capable of. What it really came down to was some of your basic standards issues, things like, interoperability of equipment and sort of devices. The issues around, how do you do sort of mass deployments? How do you, get rid of sort of issues like for DSL, one of the biggest ones was truck rolls. So, of course, you had to do truck rolls at the beginning for every single DSL connection, which, of course, was a huge cost. That was a big issue. So how do you overcome that? And what we ended up developing was TR69, which is remote device and service management. So that meant that you could install them, with zero touch. You could also diagnose on an ongoing basis. You could maintain. You could even diagnose issues within the access space. You could diagnose issues in the home. You could diagnose issues with devices. And that's how kind of TR69 then expanded out, from just doing activation to doing a lot of other sort of things as well, a lot of interesting sort of things in terms of new services. So, but anyway, getting back to the sort of story, it was around kind of reducing those barriers to market and introducing new technologies. And that's really how we have carried on. We kind of, became a kind of a pretty regular kind of STO for a very long time. We would produce specifications. We were doing specifications for specific boxes. So if you looked at any kind of fixed broadband network today, it's designed on Broadband Forum architecture specs. The boxes are BBF spec boxes. So that kind of brings us sort of forward to today where, so we went from maybe a million subscribers at the beginning of DSL to 800 million broadband broadband subscribers. I mean, across cable as well.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, our specifications became very wide. They weren't just about DSL. It was about cable. It was about other technologies. And this is where the touch points, I think, come with wireless. Is a few years ago, as the network was starting to converge, we did some work with 3GPP. And with actually before that, we did some work with the Femtocell Forum, who are now the Small Cell Forum. But we did work with them around convergence. But particularly with 3GPP, and it was around architecture kind of convergence, not really service convergence, to be totally sort of frank. It was definitely more on the architecture sort of space. But that really has accelerated. So a few years ago, we did that piece of work. It was quite successful. It wasn't painless because you know, trying to translate the fixed network view.
Yeah.
Wireless network view was challenging. Challenging technically, but also challenging in terms of language. So even things that we call boxes and devices and services very different things as to you guys. So that was partly what we had to do, was translate between and then we got into the sort of issues about, you know, how do you really bring the technologies together? And there still are challenges there, we know, around things like policy, and you know, that's a thorny issue.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, I think, for you know, since SDN and NFV becoming very live kind of issues and live potential, is that that's now opened up a whole new convergence discussion. So we are again in kind of big discussions with 3GPP about how we should do this. So of course, you know, NFV and SDN kind of really do bring up some great potential to properly converge. But it doesn't mean that we have overcome all of the issues. There are obviously still big differences between the networks, but we really do believe they are gonna come together. It is just a question of sort of probably when that happens rather than if, isn't it? You know, I think everyone realizes now, you know, those different stovepipes you have in networks, it's not going to be around that much longer.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess that kind of brings up again, kind of segue to your recent announcement about diving more into the NFV and SDN space. I guess maybe you can give a little high level view of what that is, what the announcement was, and I guess the importance of it. Like you said, it is, you know, again, you guys have been doing a lot of evolution over the past 25 years, and again, does seem like the next version for all of telecom and broadband, really. So I guess, the importance of that for you guys.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's. I mean, the one thing I didn't sort of talk about was who we are in terms of membership, and our membership has been on the fixed side. Yeah. So it's basically the fixed providers, you know, plus their vendor community. So that would be the hardware vendors, you know, software vendors, the CPE guys, chip vendors. They're an important constituent. You know, and quite so frankly, I mean, all of our work really, you know, it is more of a kind of bottom up approach. You know, it's where the members want the work to go is where we go. I mean, we do have a clear strategy, but strategy in standards organisations is always a interesting thing to go for.
It's tricky.
Yeah, you know, we do try to sort of, you know, to have that top down, you know, view, but we consult with a lot of the industry. You know, we talk to executives, of course, we talk to analysts, we talk to people like you, you know, to get that wider view of where we really should be going. And it's you know, so we're getting more pushed in that direction. And you know, you look at all of the big operators, you know, they're all basically saying the same sort of thing. You know, they do know that they really have one network. You know, the fixed network is an incredibly important part of their jigsaw puzzle. You know, it's funny, for all the things talked about, you know, with wireless, you know, and I think we all get the fact that wireless has been, you know, incredibly important for the operator community. They obviously, you know, that's where their growth has been. I mean, let's just say it bluntly, you know, that's where it's been. But it's all been on the back of that fixed network.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
The backhaul and fronthaul and all those kind of other good things. You know, you really need it. So, you know, maybe it's taken us a while to get to this point, but I think as soon as people started talking about this idea that, you know, as I say, the stovepipes would no longer exist, you know, those barriers were coming down, then immediately it opens up opportunities. And that was the sort of first thought, was how is this going to change things? You know, it's kind of interesting that, you know, NFVs seem to be more being pushed in the enterprise and the wireless space.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's because it made sort of sense at the beginning that you could make some big changes there. But you look at potentially what it's going to do with access. And when you look at sort of projects like, the whole kind of cord, what we call cloud CO kind of ideas. So what's going to happen to the central office, and potentially what could be delivered out of the central office? It's that could be a real point of convergence. And of course, this whole idea about, the operator is really going to become, kind of cloud operators, and really from the user point of view, isn't it? They really don't care. They really, really don't care. It's like they just think of it as being a connection. And, that it's kind of quaint, isn't it, these days, to sort of think of it as being, like a wireless connection and a broadband connection. The particularly young users, they really don't see the difference. So I think that's the challenge to us, is really how do we make that a reality? And quite honestly, I think at this sort of point, we can say there's potential, and we can say that it will be great when we get to a point of just being about connections,
mm-hmm.
and it really not mattering which way it is. Of course, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
The connections are very different, aren't they? And the services delivered are very different. And so there's a lot of things we need to overcome. But yes, I think there's definitely interest. I would sort of say throughout our membership, in this area. The question of how we get to that point, and what the role is between the vendor community and the operators, and open source kind of activities. There are a lot of challenges there, as I'm sure you've seen on the wireless side. Yeah,
no, exactly. No, I've talked to a lot of telecom operators, and a lot of them, the larger ones, have obviously wireless and wireline operations. And again, they talk a lot about the fact that virtualization, like you were saying, is going to be a key part to them, kind of bringing that all together into a single network at some point. Where again, for the consumer, it is just a connection. It doesn't matter what it is. And obviously, behind the scenes, it is all chaos going on, and hopefully that's being streamlined. But you're right, it does seem like the operators out there are, like you said, kind of looking for this way to kind of simplify all of their operations as much as they possibly can. And software seems to be the way to do that. And obviously, SDN and NFV are kind of two ways to go down that route there. So it does seem like you said, you guys, again, have so much history in working behind the scenes. Like you said, I mean, looking, like you're saying, going back to kind of what you did at the beginning, having to do truck rolls out to put in DSL deployments nowadays just seems crazy. I mean, I'm sure there are new, kids nowadays who that makes no sense. That doesn't even comprehend what that even means. But those of us who were around back then, remember that's kind of how it was. You had to; these were huge processes, and to be able to simplify everything is such a big part of all this. So that's you guys seem to have a lot of history, at least in terms of working through those processes there.
Yeah, I think so. One other sort of thing I would like to sort of say as well about convergence is that I said a few years ago we did some convergence work with 3GPP.
Yeah.
And what it was more like was really, we put a lot of effort into interworking. Mm-hmm. So we called it interworking on purpose. It wasn't convergence. It was really just a way for the two networks to interwork more effectively, to use resources more effectively. But to truly have convergence, I think there's an interesting question there. Are we really talking about, convergence that would be, are we just going to bring together the two networks and try and get the best of both, and basically piggyback off of things we've already done in the past? Mm-hmm. Or does SDN and NFV and what it's pointing towards, this idea of being a cloud operator, are we truly going to go the cloud direction? Because if we're really going to go the cloud direction, then maybe some of the things we did in the past just won't be applicable anymore.
That's an interesting one to look at. I mean, that's, at least from the telecom side of things, and I'm sure from the fixed side as well, there's so much legacy equipment out there and legacy mindsets of how things always were. And again, it does seem like ideally, the future would be a cloud type of environment, just for ease of rolling up services and just making things simpler. But there's just so much legacy there. I mean, is that a possibility to kind of work towards that true cloud environment, or is that one of those things that is more of a 100-year process as opposed to a 5-year process?
Well, so a friend of mine sort of said to me the other day that the way we should think about migration is that it's a journey, not a destination. you're never really going to get there. It's always going to be moving. So what we should maybe sort of be thinking about is we absolutely have to start where we are. So I agree with you. Thinking about backwards compatibility and the legacy is really, really important. I mean, not the least of which, for this reason, that if you are talking about a global kind of system, which I think we are, we're talking about all of this really converging, and not just converging, but the operators working in unison more like wireless does.
Mm-hmm.
They need to actually more cooperate more than they ever have done before. So if you're selling cloud services, so let's say you're the cloud operator, you may have your own sort of services, you may have some services that you want to sell to other operators. What does that exactly look like? There's a good chance. I mean, somebody showed me this number the other day, that between 20 and 60% of your customers are going to be on somebody else's network. Now, what if some of those customers are on a small operator's network? Somebody like sort of, I'm not denigrating them at all, but let's sort of say somebody like Frontier, or somebody of that kind of sort of size, or maybe a smaller operator in Europe. I'm sure we can come up with loads of examples, but some of those sort of smaller operators, they haven't necessarily got the staffing to completely do this sort of generational shift. They have probably some equipment, which is even more legacy. Particularly when you go to the mom and pops, not Frontier, because Frontier are one of the bigger players. But let's say you go to organizations like NECA or Pasco in the US, and some of those guys are tiny. They may even have just a couple of engineers. You may well have some remote offices located in those operators. So you're going to need to be selling services across that broad expanse of operators. So backwards compatibility is a really big issue. So I would totally agree with you. I think that we really do need to worry about that if we're truly going to be a global kind of market. And I think that certainly sort of can't be underestimated. But I think also to sort of talk about where do we want to sort of get to? I think we do want to get to that point. We do want to get to the point where we really can have that kind of you really are a cloud operator. Because let's sort of face it, it's like what is the competition to the telcos? Whether they're wireless or wireline or both. You're talking about it's Amazon and
these web-based OTT guys out there, who are just running on top of these networks. Exactly.
So if you're effectively going to sort of compete with that, you've really got to take that cloud ethos. And it's like the idea around things like sort of DevOps and that whole kind of new approach that we talk about. That is what those guys do. And you're either going to take this on in reality and really do it, or you're not. And I think this idea about where your methodology needs to go, what kind of services you're sort of selling, you've got to sort of do it in a very sort of serious way, and to understand that it isn't just how do I sort of put this? It's not like just doing the same business we do today more efficiently. If I could criticize sort of standards, and I suppose I'm in a position where I could, one of them is that standards in the past and has always been very insular. It's always about how do you manage networks better for the operator. It's that kind of perspective. Whereas I think when you look at some of the cloud discussion and you look at some of the way they talk about enabling their customer. It's very outward looking. I think that to me is the big shift we've got to make. And it's interesting. I mean, there certainly are some operators doing this, aren't they? The way that AT&T talk, or the way that Orange are talking. There's been recent announcements. Over that example, it was Orange and AT&T. And
the Ecom platform.
And there was a deal. There was a thing they did with Colt where they sold services. I think it was the US customer, but they managed to turn up the service and turn it down, in an automated way. Now, that was one example, but it was an interesting example of sort of saying that's the kind of thing we need to do. It was much more on demand. And it's that kind of on-demand thinking that we sort of need, but we can't underestimate what it's going to take to get to that point. We can't just do things that we have always done. Like, we can't just do OSS and BSS and network management in just the same old way. It's got to be, yes, it's got to be more efficient, but it's got to be enabling a very different sort of thing. That's this kind of idea that, when you look at what customers sort of talk about when they say about they just want a connection, they really don't care what it is. They just sort of think, in fact, they think in device terms now, don't they? Rather than anything else. It's just the device that really matters. So wherever they are, they can be in their home. They expect exactly the same. And so I think there are some challenges we've got to sort of go through, but I think the good thing is we seem to be getting to a point where we're recognizing, I think, more honestly what the challenge really is. I think there's a lot of movement going on. There's a lot of very interesting projects. Yeah. But we aren't at a point yet, I think, where we can sort of say we certainly aren't at victory, but at least we're making some good progress, and I think recognizing where we need to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you bring up two great, you touch on a lot of the big challenges, and obviously it does seem like mindset and standards are obviously two of the big ones, and those, like you're saying, those are two of maybe the more challenging ones to get around, because the technology and those things, it seems like at some point enough smart people working on this stuff make the technology work. It's somehow they get it all to work at the end of the day. Right. But when it comes to kind of the standards issue, that's something you guys obviously have a lot of history with, and it does seem like in the software world that there is a lot more talk and focus on open source and kind of what open source means to standards, because one way to look at that would be those are two different items. I mean, standards and open source don't seem to really be the same, but they kind of need to be because telecom and broadband companies like some standards. They like to be able to know that what they're deploying is going to work. But also that mindset issue, trying to get everybody on board with this move. That's a huge a generational operational challenge that seems to be in front of everybody. Are those things that you, with your history in doing a lot of this, do you see this as being surmountable, I guess?
Yeah, I think that maybe the pace of the change is the thing that we really need to recognize, isn't it? It's the, I think there are some things in software development. I would sort of say that the software guys, the open source guys, need to maybe recognize is that, telecoms, a big telecom network is not going to go at the pace that they do, say, within a data center. Doing upgrades in a data center is still not the same thing as doing upgrades in a big WAN. Two different things. And so, when you sort of talk to operators, particularly the operational guys, about the challenges that they sort of see, is that, because they look at some of the NFV activity as being, it's very interesting, but they see some of it as being a bit of a science experiment. What they're worried about is how are they going to bring it into their network, into a live network, and you've got the CFO breathing down their neck, sort of saying, "What are you doing to my paying customers?" You better not damage them. You better not damage any of that revenue stream. And when you make these sort of changes, you better not be cannibalizing what we're already sort of like doing. There needs to be a lot of decision points sort of like in there. And I think this idea that, I think it's true that traditionally the lifespan that you saw in telecom networks is going to change. Mm-hmm. What you would sort of see 20, 30 years with some network elements, you could easily see that lifetime for some of them. That certainly is going to change. I think, we go anywhere near this kind of white box kind of approach, it's going to get quicker, but still this idea of stability and backwards compatibility are still going to be kind of crucial issues. And I think it's one thing talking about the pace of change in somebody like AT&T or Orange or, Verizon or the others being faster, but you won't necessarily see the same sort of pace in some of the smaller operators. And if you need to do business with those smaller operators, then you have to really worry, don't you, about backwards compatibility. You have to worry that the standards are being developed in such a way that legacy isn't going to be, any kind of issue. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the things we are sort of concerning ourselves with. You know, a lot of our work items are around things like, you know, so some of the baseline work, it's a little bit kind of boring, to be honest with you. It's not the most exciting thing for the outside world. But some of the things we've been doing is things like mapping current broadband networks against a virtualized network. So what are the touch points? What APIs need to be in place? You know, how, you know, what does that map look like? Because then once you've got the map, then you can worry about things like, okay, so what APIs need building? You know, how do you really virtualize an element? You know, where could you put some of these functions? You know, and what do you call those sort of functions? Because, you know, again, one of the things you really need to be concerned about, if you're looking at a global marketplace, then you need some common language and you need some common definitions, you know, so that people can actually order across those networks and not be confused. You know, quite honestly, it's like, it's sort of funny that, you sort of think most of these fixed networks so far have been kind of islands, and they've been islands that have been based on, you know, regulatory or competition kind of areas.
Yeah.
And as that changes, that's going to change a lot of those relationships. And the challenge, I think, goes wider than just the sort of telcos or standards. It also goes into regulation.
Yeah, that's a whole other hour-long conversation there. You're right, and regulation. That's a whole can of worms there. Especially looking at international, what countries are trying to do, and a lot of countries now want to have, you know, data centers in their own countries for these companies as well. So that's a big topic there.
Right. I mean, absolutely, and I think so. From our point of view, we're sort of thinking about how do you lay the groundwork for some of this activity to sort of, you know, to happen. So, you know, we're thinking about things. What does that framework have to look like? You know. When you look at all of these different open source activities, you know, there's a lot of really good work going on. There really is. There's a lot. But there's an awful lot of choices as well, you know, and, you know, choices still need to be made. And so one of the discussions we're having, you know, within the operators is, you know, how do you make sense of this? You know, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and there's a whole bunch of different orchestration projects on this panel session. And one of the operators asked this sort of question. He said, well, you know, so how am I supposed to make sense of this? How am I supposed to make a choice? You know, so what is the difference between you guys? How do you work together? How does it interoperate? And, you know, I mean, there was a lot of goodwill on that panel, but there wasn't an answer to that because, you know, they are separate projects. They almost act like they are like separate products, of course, because they are particular streams of effort. Now, again, those are good things, but you do need to make choices.
Exactly. Yeah. At the end of the day, someone has to make a choice, and if that choice is, you know, unfortunately the wrong choice, you know, there's that whole, you know, the throat to choke kind of thing, where, you know, someone at the end of the day has got to pay for, or not pay for, but someone's got to be responsible for those decisions that are made. And it does seem like you said, we're still in a phase where, you know, there can be wrong avenues. I mean, if you could possibly make a wrong choice. And no one wants to do that, obviously, because it's big investments. So it's a matter of making sure you make the right choice there.
Well, yeah, and you go back a sort of few years, and just, well, quite a few years, and you sort of think, well, compute went through the same thing, didn't they? You know, how many platforms were there like 25 years ago, 30 years ago? And what we end up now with, what, 2? Yeah. Maybe more, but basically 2.
Yeah, 2, exactly, yeah.
And but that took quite some time to get through that, didn't it? You know, and you think that the market basically shook it out. I would question whether we have time to allow the market to shake this out in telecoms. 20 years would be too long.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something I've always been a little bit concerned about, is the timing of all this, because it does seem like it is moving at such a pace, or at least the vendor community or the operators, you know, they're wanting to make this transition in a relatively rapid pace, but there is still so much. When you talk to the guys who are actually having to do the work inside the telecom operators, you know, the CTOs and those guys who are, you know, they're a bit concerned about that, because they see what they need to do with these decisions, and they're like, wow, okay, I can't just do this overnight without, you know, like you said, bringing up all those challenges of cannibalizing or maybe taking a network down somewhere. I mean, there's so many things involved in these processes, and the timing part is tricky because, you know, obviously everybody wants this done yesterday, but these are long, drawn out things that, you know, they take a lot of time to do. And, you know, hopefully everybody understands that and allows it to have that. But like you said, it might not be allowed to have that much the time that it needs. And that's a big challenge there.
Yeah, it's like you can't underestimate, isn't it? Just the complexity of the network. I think sometimes people have kind of, thought too much like that.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, I think you get that from government, don't you? You know, it's like I saw an announcement the other day. There was, you know, because I live in the US, obviously I've lived in the US for a long time, but I still, you know, pick up the news from the UK. So that's where I'm from. So I was, and there was, in one of the recent sort of statements from the government, there was this kind of discussion around broadband and just talking about how quickly broadband kind of should really be improving in the UK. And there was, you know, some nice platitudes sort of said. And it wasn't there was anything wrong necessarily with what he sort of said, but it was just this sort of like idea of making it sound like it was so easy. It really isn't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's different. I mean, it's like when we look back, you know, when they used to build these huge dams across the Western United States, and, you know, these things, you look at them now and like, oh, that's cool. It's a big concrete structure. It looks really nice. But it took a lot of people's lives to build these structures, and it took a lot of time, a lot of engineering. And, you know, while they look pretty today and do their jobs, there's a lot of sweat behind what was put out there. And it's, you know, it's obviously easy to gloss over that, but you should never quite downplay what actually went into making those things. So it's tricky.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, Robin, I think we could talk for another hour on this topic here, but maybe what we should do is maybe just make some plans to touch base again as you guys kind of evolve down this path towards working towards this virtualized future. And maybe what we could do is, you know, as you guys make some progress there, we can touch base with you again on some of those projects and kind of get up to date on what's happening. But again, a great insight. Obviously, it's good to kind of, you know, see what you guys are doing in terms of virtualization. Like you said, it's kind of everything's evolving towards this one network type of thing. And obviously, broadband and wired networks are a huge part of this, and virtualization is going to play a big role as well. But it's always great to catch up with you guys and get some insight. But like I said, definitely great to talk to you today. Thanks so much for the time today. Well, thanks for watching this week's show, and make sure to check out our next NFV SDN Reality Check when we speak with VMware on its views of development and deployment of NFV-based platforms by the telecom industry. Thanks for watching.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.